everybody, and welcome to the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. Where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. I'm Ace Edwards, right alongside
Connor Baltazar.
And no weekly recap this week because we have decided to finally post our long-awaited Catsketball previews, plural, of the men and women's team, which both have high expectations, as nearly every single preseason sport for K-State does or has in the Gene Taylor era. But they're high expectations in very different ways, which we're obviously going to go over. But before we start talking about the men's Catsketball team first, we do want to thank the sponsors of the show, and that is Greg, Arthur, and Grandma.
Thank you, Grandma.
And if you want to support the show financially and have your name right out at the beginning of every single episode, please be sure to check out the official supporters link found in our podcast and Twitter bios. But let's go ahead and dive straight in to the men's Catsketball team. And I don't think that it is at all a controversial opinion at this point that last year was a massive disappointment for Jerome Tang and the men's Catsketball team, with a first-round NIT exit in which people were questioning, and I still probably believe, that we only were at the NIT because some other team said no. So, and the weird thing is that last season was an abject disappointment. And oftentimes when you're coming off of a season like that, you sort of damper the expectations for next year as well. But K-State went out and got some really, really big transfers. And this is we before we get into the specific roster and scheduling and stuff, I just want to sort of start with the on top, because we've seen 2 years of Jerome Tang. One where it was basically a ragtag group of guys that Tang sort of grabbed out of the portal, plus Keontae Johnson and Marquise Noel, and I guess Cam Carter. Cam Carter was a pretty high choice as well. But you had that season where it was an Elite Eight run. You had a season where Tang famously didn't want to get into NIL bidding wars, and some recruits got houses because of this fact, most notably from Alabama. And you could say that Tang only really got one or two of his first choices, and that would probably be, Tyler Perry, Arthur Kaluma?
I would narrow that down to Kaluma. Perry, honestly, was probably choice 3, I think, a point guard. I'm thinking about A. Smith to Texas and Estrada to Bama. So my guess is probably that he was 3rd. He may have been a take with either of those guys just of how good a shooter he was projected to be. I still think he did get kind of a raw deal with having to do a lot more point guard than we initially wanted. I think he would have been a better shooter had he not been in that role, but we can't change the past. So, but going down a side tangent there, I'd say Kaluma was probably our only real number one luxury get, and even then, it was a bit of a push there because we were doing a bit of projection based on his athletic ability, recruiting profile, and whatnot, because Creighton didn't try super hard to keep him around, I don't think, because he was their 4th or 5th offensive option.
Yeah. So arguably one first choice last year to this season, and by the way, that was the NIT berth, and then in season 3 for Tang, suddenly he's able to get the majority of his first choices in the transfer portal, which we'll name them whenever we go through the roster. But, I do think that the pressure is very much on for Jerome Tang and the staff this season, because we've seen the high highs, and then we've sort of seen probably what I would assume to be the floor because of the early days of NIL and how that was going to work. We didn't know, and the staff probably didn't know, to the extent that they would have to be willing to get into bidding wars for players. So I do think that, I don't want to say that this is a make or break year for Jerome Tang, but it's certainly one that if there isn't a lot of consistent winning, the heat gets turned up a lot under the seat there.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair way to look at it. Um, I I don't know how much pressure the staff is or is not feeling, because I do think they're probably pretty confident in this roster. To be fair, last year going into the season, they were pretty confident as well, but that also was with the caveat of having Naquan Tomlin on that team, and uh, Quez Glover, whether he was going to be a major contributor or not, was at the very least like another option that was available that would have lengthened the bench a little bit. Uh, which again, I'm very curious to see what Quez Glover does this year at Ohio State, because he was an incredible scorer at Samford, but obviously never played for K State. But we're used to seeing optimism from the staff. I do think that there's a lot of reason to be optimistic about this group, though. But as fans, we haven't really seen this team do anything organized together, although that is quickly approaching.
Yeah. And I think the best way to put it is we have a lot to cover with the new faces, because I was originally going to say like, oh, we'll only cover the new faces, before I realized there are only 3 players from last year's team that are returning. That's David Gasson, who is going to he's going to try his absolute best to get those boards, and he's quietly become a folk hero, at least among us, because of several reasons. Taj Manning, and then Michaela Rich, who is an athletic monster. But of the 3 returning, you have one known quantity that is good, and that's David Gasson. Everything else is projection, and there is a small part of me that is terrified because of that fact. But it's also just kind of the way I think college basketball is going to be.
Yeah, I think it's better to accept that, particularly when you're trying to rebuild the program from what was a down season. There were a lot of guys that were on eligibility, probably a lot of guys that we asked to leave, and there were probably a lot of guys that we wanted to keep around, but maybe they weren't quite worth what they were asking. But the guys that we did keep around, I am fairly interested in, particularly David Gasson, who really kind of last season as a whole was just kind of a massive redemption arc for David Gasson, and he really proved just what a valuable asset he is to the team. I mean, last year he averaged just under 8 points a game and just under 7 rebounds a game. He ended up really being a pretty big reason why last year's team didn't end up even worse than it was. So we have to give a lot of credit where it's due there for David Gasson.
Yeah, but as for the other 2 pieces of Taj Manning and Michaela Rich, we'll start and end with Michaela Rich, because Taj Manning is just kind of who he is. But Michaela Rich, all we know about him is he's an athletic freak who can yam it. That's all we know about Michaela Rich up to this point. And don't get me wrong, that is a very, very exciting skill set. You can't really project anything from it, though.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem. He has a lot of development left still. He did some really interesting stuff last year, particularly on the offensive end. As we know, incredible dunker, can really play above the rim, and kind of outplays his size, because he is, I don't want to say undersized, but for his skill set, which is going to be more around the basket, he does play bigger than he is. And last year we didn't see a ton of him for some long stretches of time, but we did see a lot of him in the NIT game against Iowa. And I think that was maybe the most telling performance that we got out of Michaela Rich the entire year, where it was pretty much he definitely is going to end up being an offensive asset, and has some things that he can do, but has a lot of work to do defensively. And that's mainly knowing his assignments and knowing like what his job is, where he needs to be at what time. Positioning as well is also a big thing for him. But it's he's still a really exciting piece, and I'm glad that we kept him around. Especially with him only being a true freshman.
Yeah, so he's young and he has time to develop, but everyone else on this roster is a new face. And we'll go in number order with what I think everyone is projecting to be the starting point guard. It would be a borderline, out of left field, deep drive to left center by Castellanos. It's Doug McDaniel, the transfer from Michigan, I believe, correct?
Correct.
And Doug McDaniel is almost certainly going to be the starting point. And he's sort of made his career on being relatively efficient, 40% from the field, 36% from three, and doing a little bit of everything else, including, 4.1 assists per game, 3.4 rebounds a game. And he's also used to playing a lot, averaging nearly 33 minutes per game. And Connor, I know you're more of the advanced analytics / I actually know what I'm talking about guy, but yeah, it would be a surprise if Doug McDaniel is not A, starting, and B, if you listen to the staff, he honestly might be the most hyped up of all of the people that are new outside of maybe Coleman Hawkins. But Tang went on record saying if there are or was it Uric Malagy? He said, like, if there's 3 better point guards in the country, show them to me.
I think it was Uric that said that, but I don't necessarily quote me on that. But no, Doug McDaniel, he's geared up for a really big season. He was a very productive player on some Michigan teams that had a lot of guys worse than him. And last year he averaged over 16 a game with 4.7 assists and improved his game in pretty much every facet with some additional time on the floor. I mean, last year he was playing 35 and a half minutes a game. Evan Mia's advanced analytics have him as a top 100 player in the entire country. They have him at 92, behind only Coleman Hawkins on the K-State roster, and with a pretty high BPR rating. But he had some pretty significant performances last year as well, where he really put on some marquee moments. He had a fantastic performance against Florida, double overtime loss, where he dropped 33. Also dropped 33 in an overtime loss at Oregon, where I think he hit a couple of buzzer beaters maybe, and was scoring double figures pretty much every night. In fact, there were only 2 games all of last year where he did not eclipse double figures in scoring, and that was a loss at home against Minnesota and then a loss in the Big Ten tournament against Penn State, and he scored 9 and 7 in those games respectively. So he was getting his more often than not, and he's a really good creator of offense, which is going to be like the biggest thing. He's much more explosive than Tyler Perry. He's a little larger than Marquise Noel. He still isn't a huge guard. He's 5'11" at best. I think that's being a little bit generous.
Well, Marquise Noel wasn't 5'8", so
that is also true. I'd say McDaniel's probably more in the 5'9 3/4 range, but still should be a huge asset for this this K-State team, and almost, again, like you said, like almost certainly is going to be the starting point guard for K-State. His PER, player efficiency rating, was a 16.8 last year, and his effective field goal percentage was 48.6. Just really, really good. And he also did all of this last year on 26% usage. So 26% of Michigan's possessions, he was the focus. So really, really, really big piece for Michigan that last year obviously didn't go the way they wanted at Michigan. And so he's definitely got a bit of a chip on his shoulder with that.
Yeah, and was he the first portal pickup of the year as well?
I think he was. Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, and I remember the massive celebration that was had because he was sort of the cream of the crop of the original group of players. But I think weirdly enough, this next guy was either the second guy to commit or he was very early, and that's Max Jones, who's another guard who transferred from Cal State Fullerton, who's a career 43% shooter, 36% from three, and he has 3.8 rebounds a game, 2 assists per game, and very similar minutes per game to Doug McDaniel. In fact, just if you're looking at his pure stat line, he is similar to Doug McDaniel, except for the difference is Doug McDaniel played at Michigan and Max Jones played at Cal State Fullerton and Division II Tampa. But I think Max Jones, the other spots outside of Doug McDaniel, David Gasson, and probably Ungana and Yenso and Coleman Hawkins. So like there are one or two spots in the starting five that are up for grabs to kind of anyone to take. So I really do think that 4 and 5 are going to be in a little bit of a dogfight, and Max Jones is going to be one of the names involved, of course, because he's on the roster.
Yeah, Max Jones was one of the more interesting pickups, I think, particularly now because he has maybe gone under the radar more than most of the other pickups. Just not a lot of discussion has been made about him. He's been overshadowed by a few other guys. But there's been some chatter that's been picking up on him recently. Notably, he's going to be one of the state's representatives at Big 12 Media Days, which I think is another really interesting development there. Maybe points towards where we expect him to be. But I think some of the hesitation on Max Jones has been that his numbers at Cal State Fullerton were questionable in some places. He was a pretty high volume scorer, but he was kind of wildly inefficient. Last year, only making 38% of his field goals, around the same percentage from three, actually a higher percentage from three, but only by a few decimal points. And he averaged 22 a game in his per 40. So it's a really strange stat line there. 15.3 is his normal, 46% on his effective field goal percentage. But he also did kind of wear the crown as being one of the least efficient scorers at the rim in the country last year, which there are a few different explanations for, some good, some bad. One of them is that he just sucks at finishing at the rim. But some of the more interesting ones that I've been hearing recently have been maybe that he was one of the few offensive weapons on a Cal State Fullerton team that really was just not that good. And he was just forcing it a lot. That is just going to hurt anybody's efficiency. We'll definitely be asking him to be playing a much, much smaller role here at K-State as well than he was playing at Fullerton, because whatever they were asking him to do there, I mean, he had a 32.7% usage rate, which is just absolutely absurd at Cal State last year. I mean, good grief. And he also missed some time with some injuries as well, I think. So it just, I think that he's probably drawn here just because we're going to let him be able to play a role a bit more than having to be a star, which if he ends up being a star, then more power to him. But he has been an interesting follow, just if no other reason than because his name has kind of popped up a little bit more than I was expecting in some of this lead up to the season.
Yeah, and perhaps the other guy that was similar, another Jones, keeping up with the Joneses here, is CJ Jones, who, again, pretty similar-ish stat line to Max Jones. 40% from the field, 36% from three, 3.6 assists per game, nearly 3 rebounds a game. And like he played for UIC, which I believe is University of Illinois Chicago, and he was sort of, another, I don't want to say under the radar guy, but he and both him and CJ Jones, I feel like Max Jones are kind of the guys that are kind of there, like in terms of the fan perception. And I don't think that's because they're bad players. I think it's because Doug McDaniel has just sort of been touted as the main guard.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. CJ Jones, one of the more interesting things about him is that he kind of came onto the scene early in the recruiting process as being one of the trendy guys to pick as being like your guy that you're following going into the season. But it's been so long, I think people maybe started to forget a little bit about him. And this is another guy that we kind of plucked from a not as good situation up at UIC because that was not a particularly great UIC squad either. But he comes to K-State looking hopefully to play a bit better than he had been. Evan Mia Analytics, they do not like CJ Jones because offensively they really don't like his performance rating. And he's barely breaking even defensively. But again, with some of the smaller schools, it is a little tough to say what these guys are exactly. But he, if nothing else, brings an interesting frame to the court. He averaged 11.5 points a game last year, just under 5 assists. He'll be a bit of a jack of all trades guard, I imagine, that we're maybe going to try and have a bit of a defensive focus and be kind of our stopper. I think there's an existing relationship as well between him and Buddy Rich.
Both being from East St. Louis.
Yeah, I seem to remember that being like a talking point around the time of his commitment, was that they had known each other already. I can't remember exactly though, but it's an interesting grab. Definitely someone that flew under the radar a little bit, I guess you could say, as a recruit. But I'm still pretty curious to see what he's going to end up doing for this team. And he was a guy that was a kind of like a hipster choice as being a potential starter. Like if you wanted to like be different and be like, this is going to be a guy to watch, then like you were going to say CJ Jones. But enough time has passed that maybe the mantle has passed as well, and that to Max Jones. That's kind of been the pick as of late.
Yeah.
But CJ Jones probably going to be battling for a starting spot. I don't know if he still is, but he was still a guy that the staff identified pretty early and liked.
Yeah, and the next name is someone we don't have to spend a lot of time on, and that's no disrespect to him. He's just not ready, and that's Moby Akegaruka. He's a JUCO transfer who is freakishly athletic. And I know what you're thinking because we had one of those before in the before times. He's not there yet. And while he is an athletic freak, I think that he's a sort of let marinate for a year kind of guy.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I don't really have much to say on him other than I think his background is interesting because he's of Nigerian heritage and grew up in various places in Europe and lists his home as Galway, Ireland.
And he does have the Irish accent too.
Yeah, so he's definitely got an interesting background, both Nigerian and Irish as well. And comes to K-State, and again, freak athlete, but not somebody I'm really expecting much from this year. I'd love to be pleasantly surprised. I think it would be awesome if we had a Nigerian Irishman just balling out. I think that'd be incredible. And then we could start bringing like Irish flags and Nigerian flags to games, and that'd be funny. But yeah, not expecting a ton from him this year.
Yeah. And if you talk to most people at the beginning of this offseason cycle, you probably wouldn't have expected much from the first true freshman and only true freshman on this roster, actually, in David Castillo. But apparently he's picking up a lot of hype coming out of Sunrise Christian Academy as a true freshman, which I hand up, didn't see it coming. But apparently he's in a fight to be one of the first guys off the bench, if not starting.
Yeah. I'm definitely really surprised that he's gotten the amount of run that he has this offseason. I guess we shouldn't be, because he was a 5-star that kind of dropped into being a 4-star, because a lot of schools cooled on him because he got a little dinged up and didn't play as much as he had at one point. But he really finished really strong in his high school career, and has apparently just hit the ground like on fire. Manhattan. I mean, the GOAT of K-State basketball, Jacob Pullen, went on record saying that if anybody were ever to beat his scoring record at K-State, that he thinks it would be David Castillo.
Which is nuts.
Yeah, which is a crazy thing to say. I've not really known Pullen to like ever be one to be particularly hyperbolic. I don't know him, but he's not made a statement like that before. So that's what I'm basing that on. But I mean, Castillo is a multi-level scorer. His biggest disadvantage is probably going to be that he's a little undersized. But at the college level, that doesn't necessarily stop you from being a great scorer. He's particularly a good shooter. I think he could carve out a really interesting role as a change of pace guard to spell Doug McDaniel. I highly doubt he'll be starting much, if at all. I wouldn't think he would, simply because I think it'll be tough to put him and McDaniel on the court at the same time defensively. They have like 2 6-foot and under guards. Maybe matchup dependent. If we just need a bunch of shooters on the floor, we might see him at the same time. But Castillo, at one point, I was expecting very little from. At this point, I'm still not expecting a lot from David Castillo, but I'm definitely keeping my eye on him more than I have been before.
Yeah, and sort of, you mentioned complimentary guard, and I think that's probably the best way to describe the next guy in Brandon Housen, where he will have exactly one job. He will be a three-point shooter. He will be a rotational three-point shooter. He has shot almost 40% from three in his career. That's probably what he's going to do here.
Yeah, that is really all that I am expecting from Brendan Housen, and anyone that is expecting anything additional from Brendan Housen, I mean, you're free to do so. I would not get your hopes up, though, because he is a three-point shooter through and through. Last season, for example, he attempted 5.2 field goals per game, and 4.7 of those were 3-point attempts. So let's just set the table there really quick. I mean, last year in total, he had 176 field goal attempts. 16 of them were 2-point attempts. 160 were 3-point attempts. He is a mercenary sniper. That is his job. He is there to coming off the bench and just take some threes, and he's either hot or he's not. I hope that we can get some high effort defense from him, because that's the other thing you really ask for from guys like him, is just be a bulldog defender, do everything you can. You don't have to be an elite defender, but you need to put forth a lot of effort, which I think that we can probably count on him for. And then we need him to be able to come off the bench and just hit some clutch shots. I mean, that's a pretty common trait on March Madness teams that make a deep run, is a lot of times they have a guy that can really just shoot it. Last year was a Jack Golke from Oakland, I think.
Yep.
So if he can be our Jack Golke or be half of Jack Golke, that would be great, I think. But that's going to be his entire job, is be an offensive weapon to shoot from the outside and help space the floor.
Yeah. And we're getting into non-guards after some time. And the first one to mention is Achor, who I believe several people, including me, have mispronounced his name several times over, sometimes Acre, but I believe it is Achor. And you may know him as the guy who dropped, nearly 30 against KU at Samford?
It was something like that. Yeah, he had an incredible game against them in the tournament.
Yeah, but he's also a career 57% shooter, nearly 5 rebounds a game, nearly a block a game. But the only downside is he's only played like 15 minutes a game, but that's because of the way that, Sanford plays. But Achor is another example of, oh, wait a minute, we're getting we're getting first choices.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put him. He was a guy that was super high on our board. Uh, and yeah, he had an incredible game against KU in the first round that Sanford dropped, arguably should not have, but dropped that game 93-89. But he put up 23 points, 8 rebounds in that game against KU. And yeah, he only averaged, I think it was about 22 minutes a game last year. But that's because Sanford just a high press team. They run press 100% of the time. And that was a mainly conditioning choice. Most of their guards were only even playing around that. But his effective field goal percentage last year was 62.7%, which led the Southern Conference. And his overall field goal percentage was 58.6, which also led the Southern Conference. Average 16 a game, 6 rebounds a game, 2 blocks as well. I mean, he averaged about as many blocks as he averaged turnovers last year. So he is a very valuable weapon. Evan Mia really likes him as well, particularly as an offensive threat. He has him as the 116th ranked player in the entire country, and gives him a really high performance rating. But Achor is going to be, I'd imagine, a starter on this team. I'd be a little surprised if he didn't start, because he's just such a valuable player. And he was really efficient last year on a good team and at nearly 30% usage rate. So I think that we can get him to be maybe even more efficient with a slightly lower usage rate this year. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what we can do with Achor. He's a really interesting piece to add to the squad. I'm very happy with the add.
Yeah, and yeah, it's another example of first choice guy. And this next one was probably a guy who was one of our first choices out of high school that we just so happened to get in the portal, and that is Bay Fall, who transferred from Arkansas. He didn't do a whole lot there, but he was a McDonald's All-American coming out of high school. So, he has the talent, he has the upside. It's just anything that you're looking for with him is projection, really, at least in my eyes.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. He really didn't do a whole lot last year at Arkansas. He only made 1 field goal the entire year, and it was in, I think, their first game of the season. And outside of that, he hit a few free throws here and there in SEC play, but he only played in 9 games all of last year. But he was a very highly regarded recruit out of high school. Last year was his true freshman season, and he was playing behind a lot of transfers last year. So I think this year, again, I'm still not expecting a ton from him, but my main hope is that he can be a high energy rim protector off of the bench. I think that he'll mostly be valuable as a defender. He's not a player that we can really say a lot about because we just don't know much about him. But he's tall at 6'11", kind of lanky, a little skinny at 215. But he brings really long arms and is the kind of post player I think that the staff really likes. That is maybe going to be more of a defense first guy, and we can count on to collect rebounds, block shots around the rim, and run the floor. that is pretty much all that we want from our bigs. We don't really necessarily need a back to the basket guy that's just gonna kind of be a black hole of offense where if the ball gets to him, it's never coming back out. We're happy with Bayfall being able to run the floor and be high effort and be an energetic defender, which I think if he's called on this year at all, then that's something you can do. But I would imagine he'll be a pretty low end rotation to garbage time guy. And that's not an issue with him. That's we just have a lot of really talented big guys on this team.
Yeah. And speaking of talented big guys, this is he's big in that he's 6'10", but we talked about Doug McDaniel being first choice. Despite that, this next guy is probably the crown jewel of this transfer portal class. And that is the transfer from Illinois and Coleman Hawkins, who, before we even get to any of his play on the court, master level troll on Twitter. So he's basically already my hero, but he's the only guy in Illinois history with over 900 points, over 500 rebounds, over 200 assists, and 100 blocks and steals in a career. That's it. That list is one of one. And he was pretty far into the NBA draft process before he decided to come back to college and go to K-State. And apparently we threw an ungodly amount of money at him.
Yeah. I think it goes without saying that he's not only the crown jewel of our class, I think he was the crown jewel of the portal period. He was, I don't know if it was unanimous, but I'd say it was generally consensus that he was the top player available in the transfer portal this offseason because he brings a ton of experience to the floor, high level experience at that, being on not just a Big Ten team, but a really good Big Ten team. Then he has been there all 4 years as well. Additionally, he has been pretty comfortable having the role that he's been in. His usage rate's never been above 20%. His highest, in fact, the last 3 seasons, it's been just around 18.3. But he's still a really quality player. Last year, his turnover rate, he was able to shave it pretty significantly, down from 20.6% turnover rate all the way down to 13.1. He upped his defensive rebound rate by about 1. His player efficiency rating upped from a 15.4 to a 19.4. And his effective field goal percentage was the best of his career last year at 54.4%. He's, if you want to go for more traditional stats, last year he averaged 12.1 a game, which is the best of his career. He also averaged 6.1 total rebounds per game, 80% from the free throw line, 45% from the field, 37% from three, and 2.7 assists per game, low turnovers at 1.6. And he's doing all of that at 6'10", 200 pounds. So, you can't really ask for much more. And I'm a forward that diverse of a skill set. He really is a do-it-all type of player. We are going to be expecting a lot from him this year. The big thing I think with him is that last year he was really good at filling the role they needed because Terrence Shannon last year for Illinois, he was their go out and get 25 guy every single night, except for when they didn't have him or when they needed Coleman Hawkins, and he was able to turn out some great performances. He averaged 12.1 a game, but he put 30 up on Iowa, and then the following game he put up 20 on Minnesota. He dropped 22 on Northwestern and an overtime loss at one point as well. But he'll play the role that we need him to play. And it's a really important factor to consider when we're trying to find the guy in the portal. So it's a huge get for K-State. The advanced analytics love him as well. Evan Mia's player ratings, they have him as the number 11 player in the entire country. I was shocked when I didn't see him in the top 10 list on the homepage, and then I went to K-State's page, and that's how I missed it by one, and that made me feel a little better. But I'm really his offensive rating's fantastic at a 4.18. His offensive Bayesian performance rating really, really high. He is a surefire starter on this team and is going to be one of the highlights of the season, I'd imagine, for K-State.
Yeah, and you said it perfectly in that he will fill the role that we need him to. So he can be that guy on any given night if you need him to be, but he can also be your second option. He doesn't have to put the team on his back. Like, he's okay just sort of playing his role. And I think that's exceptionally rare to find a guy who is more than capable of being that guy, but doesn't feel the need to force the issue on that. That is rare in any sport, but especially basketball when it's so, individually like focused. Obviously, you're all playing as a team, but only one person has the ball at a time. So it's kind of up to the guy who has the ball to be the hero in any given moment.
Yeah, exactly.
But to complete this team is the 7-footer, because what basketball team would be complete without a 7-footer? Don't answer that question, because quite a few. But the last guy on the team is Ugonna Onyenso, who is a transfer from Kentucky, who is a 7-footer who is not an aircraft carrier, which is an exceptionally rare thing to see. But he also played a little. He wasn't the guy at Kentucky. He still played, he still contributed, but he wasn't the guy. But he is still a blue blood transfer that is a 7-footer, and I cannot emphasize this enough, that moves faster than the glacier that sunk the Titanic. So he's good in my book already. He doesn't really have to do much.
Yeah. On Yenso, the big thing with Ugo is that he is going to be kind of our defensive anchor. Offensively, he does have value. Like when I say he's going to be kind of a defensively focused player for us, that doesn't mean that he isn't going to play offense. He averaged 3.6 a game in 18 and a half minutes last year, 55% from the field, 58% from the line, didn't take any threes, but his biggest value is going to be elsewhere. 4.8 rebounds a game, including 2 on offense, and then almost 3 blocks a game, which is pretty absurd, particularly in the amount of time that he got per game. So averaging like a block every 6 minutes roughly is what we're looking at for him. His defensive rating on Evan Mia's second highest on the K-State team, behind only Coleman Hawkins. I think that Ugonna Onyenso is going to be a huge asset when it comes to protecting the rim for K-State. But I think an underrated part of his game as well is that he's actually really fast for his size and is a really great rim runner. So I'm really looking forward to seeing him as a trail guy on some fast break opportunities, because I think that this is a team that's gearing up to be a really fast team, more like Jerome Tank's first season, as opposed to last year where we kind of slow things down and focused on defense. This year's team, I think, is going to be one that is going more of like a NASCAR offense.
Yeah. And that's the roster. So we are going to split this episode into half, as in like with a time marker in the middle of this episode. Like, so you'll have men's basketball and women's basketball sections. But with that said, this episode is probably going to be like an hour and 30 minutes, but which, hey, we're having fun. We're not miserable. So I don't really care how long this goes, so long as it's not the 3-hour first episode.
I don't think we'll ever hit that again. I don't think I'm capable of doing that again. So,
but now we can dive a little bit into K-State's schedule. We're not going to go through every single game, because we more or less did that on a weekly recap a few weeks ago, going over all the scheduling. But I think it is important to point out sort of the most notable games and the big conference games for K-State. So in terms of the big non-cons, the one that sticks out to me is LSU at home, just because it's another Power 4. And you know, not to say that everyone else on the schedule is a scrub, because I don't think that, but it is really important to pick up those Power Four victories, especially at home. So to me, that's sort of the biggest non-con game, though I will hear arguments for at least two others.
Yeah, I think if it isn't LSU, I'm going to go ahead and pick a different one, though, and go with St. John's. That's going to be a massive one. We brought in a really great recruiting class, one of the few that's been consistently rated in the top 5 recruiting classes for transfer portal, that is, along with K-State, has been St. John's. St. John's has had a pretty fantastic portal crop to come in this past offseason. And that's with them losing, I believe, Cliff Marie was a member of St. John's. So that's going to be a big game. It's a Saturday game. It's a 10:30 local tip-off. If it ends up being relevant, that is the same day as the Big 12 championship as well, which is an 11 a.m. kick. So it's going to be a little bit of a conflict there. There's a few other notable games, I suppose. Drake, just because it's at the Sprint Center, and we get Wichita State at their place, which I don't remember the last time we played there, honestly, but it's I think it has to be either St. John's or LSU. LSU for no other reason than it will be a Cam Carter revenge game.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. I forgot that's Cam Carter's team, or the team that he went to. But yeah, I agree. Those were the other two that I was willing to hear arguments on: St. John's and Wichita State, and Drake, I guess, supposed to an extent. But in terms of the conference schedule, I really, really like the draws that we got for the home teams. I really like that we got Houston and Texas Tech back to back. Really like that home draw. And I like that we also got Houston or Arizona also as a home draw. So you've already gotten some pretty high level matchups that you're only going to have to play at home. And you look at the pure away slate and you walk away feeling not too bad at all. Because in terms of the only away slate, I believe it's TCU, Baylor, and then Utah and BYU. Are those the only pure away?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's it.
You take those.
UCF.
We take those. Oh, UCF. We take those.
We still take those, yeah.
We take those.
As I say, that doesn't actually change the answer. I know I'm saying it aloud.
But still, it's important to be accurate.
Yeah, no, it's a as far as schedule draws go for getting important games against high-ranked teams, but getting them at home, I don't think it could have gone better, honestly, for K-State. I mean, as you're looking at Cincinnati, who's projected to be around in the same spot in terms of quality as K-State. We'll see about that. We're getting them as our Big 12 opener. And then you get Houston January 11th. You're traveling to Allen pretty early, honestly, January 18th. But then you get some really big games back-to-back at home, KU and Arizona, February 8th and February 11th. That's an absolutely massive 3-day stretch of basketball right there. And then you get Iowa State at home for senior day to cap off the regular season. That's March 8th at 12:30. That's going to be a national broadcast too on CBS. So and it's a big deal to get all these games at home because they should be massive draws. This team already kind of is a pretty big draw in of itself. They made a lot of waves with the entire portal class, but particularly getting Coleman Hawkins to commit was what really raised eyebrows, I think, and took K-State from kind of like a pesky team that would hang around to this team could contend for the Big 12. I'm not quite ready to say that they will, but they do have the star power and potential to do it if the pieces gel together. But again, I'm not quite ready to say this team is going to make a run at the conference, because I mean, this conference is going to just be hell on earth to fight through to get to the top. What I'm most worried about come the time for March Madness is that all the Big 12 teams are just going to be so exhausted from fighting each other all regular season that the Big 12 tournament is going to be like the worst basketball we've ever seen. So
just give up, rest all the players in the Big 12 tournament. No one cares about that anyway. But final words on expectations for this team before we get into the women's team, which I've gone on record saying that I am more excited for the women's team than the men's team, which if you're going for the over-under on this episode of 130 that I set earlier, I'm not sure that the under's a good bet. But expectations for the men's team. Like I said earlier, very high expectations from the fan base, but sort of in the opposite way of the women's team, where it's insane amounts of talent that K-State brought in for the men's team. Like, just if the games were played on paper, K-State would almost certainly be probably a second weekend team, like just based off of pure talent on the roster.
Yeah.
Games aren't played on paper, famously, as every coach ever would tell you. But I do think that second weekend is in a Big 12 contender, not saying winning, I'm saying contending. I don't think that's an unrealistic expectation either. And I say this because this is, without question, the best roster that Jerome Tang has constructed. And I don't think it's particularly close.
No, not at all. I mean, obviously, his first year team had some great stars, but I think more than anything, found just the right collection of role players to put together a team that peaked at the right time and filled some needs. But again, a lot of that was helped by getting Keontae Johnson, which honestly, kind of a 1 in a million there, getting a guy like Keontae Johnson, not just even getting him period, but getting what we did out of him is just unbelievable. Then also him finding the way to unlock Marquise Noel from the flashes that we had seen, but really completely fulfilling his potential. Then the following year, what would have been, I think, a pretty solid roster, but ultimately just could not put it together after a few things that were out of their control and some things that were in their control as well. But on paper, this is the best team that Jerome Tang has had in a while. It's the best team that K-State's had, definitely at least since their Big 12 title and the 2018-2019 season. And you may even, in terms of just raw talent on paper, go back much further than that to maybe the Frank Martin era. But I mean, this team, there's a lot riding, I'd say, on the success of this team. But I think that this team really does have what it takes to compete in the Big 12 night in, night out. We've got a good mix of guys that have come back, guys with high-level experience, guys that have dominated at lower levels, and guys we're taking shots on. I think that there's a mix of all of those groups on this team. We've got the stars, the role players, and everything in between. The biggest problem is going to be that like 2/3 of the Big 12 has also got really great rosters as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the same conference with like preseason, what is it, 1, 3, and 7?
It's more than that. The Big 12 is the first conference ever to make up half of the preseason AP top 10. So there are 5 preseason top 10 teams in the Big 12. KU, Iowa State, Houston, Zona, maybe. Can't remember. And then there's one that I am missing. Baylor, maybe?
It's probably Baylor.
It's probably Baylor. It's probably Baylor. But the overarching point is that this is a really, really tough conference. But I think K-State really can figure it out and play better. because, I mean, last year didn't really go the way that any of us wanted, including the team. But this is gearing up to be a really big season for K-State men's basketball. Even with the star power at the top of the conference, Cincinnati's ranked 20th as well. So I just add that onto the list. But then you have Texas Tech unofficially 29th. They were receiving votes. K-State was unofficially 31st. They were receiving votes as well. BYU received votes. And Arizona State even received a couple votes. I didn't know that until just now. So this is a really good conference. And even outside of those teams, there's going to be an annoying team that you have to play every single night. Like even last year, Oklahoma State fired their coach, Mike Boynton, last year, and they were not an easy out just because of their ferocious defense and just what a lengthy team they were.
Yeah. So to quote the really, really bad Big 12 song, never take a night off. But
it may be bad, but it's very accurate.
Yeah, I can't disagree with the message. I can, however, call the song Buns. But do you have any final notes before we take a pause, mostly for me to know where to put the mark in this episode?
I'm really, really excited for this men's basketball season.
All right. I am too, because at minimum, this is going to be a fun team that will likely win a whole lot of games. It's very similar to the Batcats opinion that we had last year, but kind of on roids, like the beefiest roids perhaps in existence. But that's the men's team. But, well, let's take a short little break before we talk about the team that I'm personally most excited about.